The day my family laughed at me for being broke was the same day I made a promise that would change my life forever. I stood outside a restaurant staring through the glass window while my parents, my brother, and my cousins celebrated my brother's latest business success. I wasn't inside with them. I couldn't afford the meal, and they made sure everyone knew it. My brother raised his glass and pointed toward the window where I stood. "Look at her," he said loudly enough for me to hear. 30 years old and still can't get her life together. The table erupted with laughter. My mother laughed. My father laughed. Even relatives who barely knew me laughed. I felt my face burn with humiliation. But what hurt wasn't the laughter. It was realizing that nobody at that table believed I would ever become anything. Nobody. My name is Sophia Bennett, and I was 30 years old when my family decided I would always be the failure of the family. What they didn't know was that 5 years later, they would be standing in front of me asking for help. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever been underestimated by someone close to you. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story only gets more unbelievable from here. I wasn't born poor. My family wasn't rich either. We were comfortable. My father owned a small construction company. My mother managed the finances. My older brother Ethan was the golden child. From the moment we were kids, everyone treated him differently. When Ethan got a B in school, everyone celebrated. When I got straight A's, nobody cared. When Ethan won a local soccer tournament, the family threw a party. When I received a scholarship offer, my father said, "That's nice." I spent years trying to earn the same love Ethan received naturally. It never worked. The older we got, the bigger the gap became. My parents invested money into Ethan's ambitions. They paid for his business courses. They helped him buy his first car. They funded his startup ideas. Meanwhile, I paid for everything myself: college, books, transportation, living expenses. Whenever I asked why things were different, my parents always gave the same answer: "Ethan has more potential." That sentence followed me for years. More potential, more potential, more potential, as if I had none. Still, I worked hard. I graduated with excellent grades. I found a good job. I rented a small apartment. For the first time in my life, I felt independent. Then everything collapsed. The company I worked for lost several major contracts. Layoffs started. Hundreds of employees were terminated. I was one of them. At first, I wasn't worried. I had savings. I had experience. I believed I'd find another position quickly. Instead, the economy worsened. Companies stopped hiring. Interviews disappeared. Months passed. My savings shrank. Then they vanished completely. I sold jewelry. I sold furniture. I sold anything that wasn't essential. Eventually, I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. The hardest phone call of my life came next. I called my parents. I asked for temporary help, just enough time to get back on my feet. There was silence on the line. Then my father sighed. "Fine." One word. Not, "Of course." Not, "We're here for you." Just, "Fine." I moved back into my childhood home feeling ashamed. I told myself it was temporary. 3 months, maybe 6. Then I'd leave. I had no idea I was walking into the most humiliating period of my life. At first, things seemed normal. Then the comments started. Little comments, small jokes, tiny insults disguised as humor. Still unemployed? Another interview didn't work out? Maybe some people just aren't meant for success. Every comment chipped away at my confidence. The worst came from Ethan. By then, his business was finally succeeding. Every family gathering became a celebration of him. Every conversation revolved around him. And every comparison ended with me losing. One evening, relatives gathered at my parents' house for dinner. Everyone sat around the table discussing money, new investments, new cars, vacation plans, things I couldn't afford anymore. Then Ethan smiled. "Hey, Sophia." I looked up. "Yeah? How much money is in your bank account these days?" The room became silent. I felt every eye turn toward me. I knew it was a trap. "I don't think that's anyone's business." Ethan laughed. "That bad, huh?" Several relatives chuckled. My mother smiled awkwardly but said nothing. My father looked amused. Nobody defended me. Nobody. That night, I locked myself in my room and cried. Not because I was poor, because I finally understood my place in the family. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a sister. I was their example of failure, the person they used to make Ethan look better. Months passed. The job search continued. Nothing worked. Then came the restaurant incident, the moment that changed everything. The family gathered to celebrate Ethan securing a major contract. The restaurant was expensive, far beyond what I could afford. I told everyone I wouldn't attend. A few hours later, my cousin texted me. "Everyone's asking where you are." Against my better judgment, I went. I thought maybe they genuinely wanted me there. I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment I arrived, Ethan asked why I wasn't eating. I admitted I couldn't afford it. That was all it took. The jokes started immediately, one after another, louder and louder, until the entire table was laughing. The humiliation felt endless. When I finally left, nobody stopped me. Nobody apologized. Nobody cared. I walked home alone. It was raining. My clothes were soaked. My shoes were ruined. And somewhere during that long walk, something inside me changed. I stopped wanting their approval. I stopped wanting their respect. I stopped caring whether they believed in me. For the first time in my life, I decided I would build a future without them. No validation, no support, no expectations, just results. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I opened my laptop. I began researching every opportunity I could find. Remote work, freelancing, digital skills, investments, anything, everything. I studied for hours every day. Then days became weeks. Weeks became months. And slowly, something started happening. Something nobody in my family noticed. While they were busy laughing at me, I was quietly building the foundation of a completely different life. And the opportunity that would eventually make me a millionaire was only weeks away. But before I could reach it, my family would betray me in a way I never imagined possible. A betrayal that nearly destroyed everything before it even began. If you're enjoying this story so far, subscribe and share it with someone who loves emotional revenge stories, because what happened next changed my life forever. The betrayal started with a signature. One signature. A single name written on a piece of paper. And it nearly ruined my future before it even began. At the time, I had no idea what was happening behind my back. I was too busy trying to rebuild my life. Every morning, I woke up before everyone else. I spent hours learning new skills online: digital marketing, content management, sales funnels, client acquisition, anything that could help me earn money remotely. While my family thought I was wasting time staring at a laptop, I was actually building a new future. A future they couldn't see. A future they would eventually envy. But before that happened, things became much worse. One afternoon, I received a phone call from my bank. The representative sounded concerned. "Ms. Bennett, we're calling regarding a loan application." I frowned. "What loan application?" There was a pause. Then she explained. Someone had submitted paperwork using my personal information. My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" The representative listed details that only family members would know. Address, date of birth, personal information, everything. My heart began racing. I immediately requested copies of the documents. When they arrived 2 days later, I felt sick. The emergency contact listed on the paperwork was my brother, Ethan. I stared at the page in disbelief. There had to be some mistake. There had to be an explanation. I drove straight to my parents' house. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the papers. When I walked inside, Ethan was sitting in the living room. The moment he saw the documents, his expression changed. Not surprise, not confusion, guilt. That's when I knew. "You used my information?" He rolled his eyes. "It's not a big deal." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not a big deal?" My voice echoed through the room. "You tried to open a loan using my identity." My parents entered from the kitchen. "What is all this yelling?" my mother asked. I handed her the documents. She glanced at them. Then something happened that stunned me. She sided with Ethan. Immediately. He was trying to help his business. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "What?" My father crossed his arms. "It's family." Family. The word felt like an insult. Ethan stood up. "It didn't even go through." "That's not the point. It would have been paid back." "That's not the point either." The room exploded into arguments. Nobody apologized. Nobody admitted wrongdoing. Instead, they acted like I was overreacting, like I should be grateful, like I owed them understanding. That was the moment something finally snapped inside me. I walked out. And for the first time in my life, I stopped expecting fairness from my family. I stopped expecting loyalty. I stopped expecting love. Because clearly, they weren't interested in giving any of those things. The following months became the hardest period of my life, but they also became the most important. I threw myself completely into work. Every waking hour was dedicated to learning, improving, growing. I accepted small freelance projects online. The pay was terrible. Sometimes I earned less than minimum wage. But I didn't quit. I couldn't afford to quit. Each project taught me something. Each client improved my skills. Each mistake became a lesson. Slowly, income started appearing. Small amounts at first. $100, then $200, then $500. Nothing life-changing, but enough to give me hope. Hope was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. The best part? Nobody in my family knew. I kept everything private. Every dollar I earned stayed secret. Every achievement stayed hidden. I was tired of giving them opportunities to mock me. Meanwhile, Ethan's business continued growing. At least that's what everyone believed. My parents couldn't stop talking about him. Every dinner conversation turned into another celebration. Ethan signed another client. Ethan bought new equipment. Ethan is doing amazing. I simply nodded and stayed quiet. Because for the first time, I understood something important. Not every victory needs an audience. Sometimes the most powerful progress happens in silence. About a year later, everything changed. A client I had worked with on a small project contacted me again. This time the opportunity was much bigger. Much, much bigger. They wanted someone to help manage an expanding online operation. The pay was more money than I had ever earned before. At first I thought it was a scam. It sounded too good to be true. But after several meetings, everything checked out. The opportunity was real. When I signed the contract, I cried. Not because I was rich, I wasn't. Not even close. But because for the first time in years, I could finally see a way forward. A real future. A real chance. Within months, my income tripled. Then doubled again. Then doubled again. I paid off every debt. I rebuilt my savings. I moved into my own apartment. The day I carried the last box out of my parents' house was one of the happiest days of my life. Nobody helped me move. Nobody offered congratulations. Nobody even seemed interested. My father simply said, "Don't come back if things go wrong again." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. "I won't." Then I walked away. The next 2 years were unlike anything I had ever experienced. My business skills improved rapidly, the company expanded, investments started producing returns, new opportunities appeared. Money that once seemed impossible became normal. The girl who couldn't afford dinner was suddenly negotiating 6-figure contracts. The girl who had counted coins at checkout counters was now making more money in a month than she once made in a year. But despite all the success, I never forgot. I never forgot the jokes, the laughter, the humiliation, the betrayal. Every memory remained crystal clear, and soon those memories would become important. Because while my life was improving, Ethan's life was quietly falling apart, and nobody saw it coming, not even Ethan himself. One afternoon, nearly 3 years after I left my parents' house, I received a phone call that would change everything. The caller ID showed my mother's name. I hadn't spoken to her in months. The moment I answered, I heard something I never expected. She was crying. And what she said next shocked me to my core. Ethan is in serious trouble. For a moment, I said nothing. Then she revealed the truth about his business. A truth my family had hidden from everyone. A truth that would eventually bring them to my doorstep begging for help. And for the first time in years, the balance of power was about to change. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe and share it with someone who loves powerful family betrayal and revenge stories. The next chapter is where everything starts turning upside down. My mother's voice trembled through the phone. "Please, Sophia, it's serious." For a few seconds, I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I was shocked. The last time we had spoken, she barely seemed interested in my life. Now she sounded terrified. "What happened?" I finally asked. There was a long silence. Then she said something I never expected. "Ethan's company is collapsing." I sat down immediately. The words didn't make sense. Ethan's company was the family's pride. For years, all I had heard was how successful he was, how brilliant he was, how talented he was, how much potential he had. Now suddenly it was collapsing? "What do you mean?" I asked. My mother sighed. "The business has debt." "How much debt?" Another silence. Then she gave me a number. I nearly dropped my phone. The debt was enormous, far bigger than I imagined. Millions, not thousands. Millions. For several seconds I couldn't speak. My mother started crying again. "We don't know what to do." I stared at the wall. A strange feeling settled over me. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just disbelief. For years my family had treated Ethan like a genius. Now the empire they worshipped was crumbling, and apparently nobody knew how to save it. "What exactly happened?" I asked. The truth came out slowly, piece by piece, loan after loan, bad investment after bad investment, poor decisions hidden behind impressive appearances, the expensive cars, the luxury vacations, the celebrations. Most of it had been financed through debt, a mountain of debt. The successful businessman everyone admired had actually been struggling for years. He had simply hidden it well, very well. Suddenly, countless memories made sense. The constant need to impress people, the endless spending, the obsession with appearances. It had all been a mask, a very expensive mask, and now it was falling apart. A week later, my parents asked if I would visit. Part of me didn't want to go, but curiosity won. When I arrived at the house, everything felt different. The confidence that once filled the home was gone. The atmosphere felt heavy, tense, worried. My father looked 10 years older. My mother looked exhausted. And Ethan, he barely looked like himself. The arrogant smile was gone. The confidence was gone. The man sitting across from me looked defeated. For years I had imagined what this moment might feel like. I thought I would enjoy it. I didn't. Mostly I felt sad. Sad that things had reached this point. Sad that so many years had been wasted. Then Ethan finally spoke. "I need help." The room became silent. I couldn't remember the last time he had asked anyone for help, especially me. "What kind of help?" I asked. He looked away. Then came the answer. "Money. Of course. Money." My mother immediately started crying again. My father stared at the table. Nobody met my eyes. And suddenly I understood why they had called. Not because they missed me. Not because they wanted to repair the relationship. Not because they regretted anything. They needed something. And for the first time in their lives, that something was me. Before we continue, if you've ever seen people change how they treat someone after money becomes involved, subscribe and keep watching, because the next part of this story gets even more unbelievable. I remained calm. "How much money?" The amount Ethan requested was staggering. Even though I had become successful, it wasn't a small favor. Not even close. This was life-changing money. The kind of money people spend years building. The kind of money people don't simply hand over. I looked around the room. Nobody seemed embarrassed. Nobody seemed ashamed. Instead, they looked expectant, as if helping was obvious, as if the past didn't matter, as if years of humiliation had never happened. Finally, I asked the question nobody wanted to hear. If I had been the one in trouble, would any of you have helped me? Silence. Complete silence. The answer was written on every face. No, they wouldn't have. My father cleared his throat. That isn't relevant. I almost laughed. It was the most relevant question in the room. Years earlier, I had asked for temporary help, a place to stay, a little support, a little understanding. Instead, I had become the family joke. Now the same people wanted financial rescue. The irony was impossible to ignore. Over the next hour, I learned even more disturbing details. The situation was worse than they admitted. Much worse. Creditors were demanding payment. Lawsuits were beginning. Assets were being frozen. The business wasn't struggling. It was sinking. Fast. And Ethan had hidden most of it from the family until it became impossible to hide anymore. For years, they had believed he was the success story. Now reality was exposing the truth. The golden child wasn't so golden after all. When the meeting finally ended, I stood up. Everyone watched me, waiting, hoping, praying. Then I spoke. I need time to think. My mother looked disappointed. My father looked frustrated. Ethan looked desperate. But I walked away anyway. Because this decision wasn't simple. Not after everything that had happened. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in my penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights. The view was beautiful. A view nobody in my family even knew I had. Because while they had spent years watching Ethan, nobody had been paying attention to me. The forgotten daughter. The disappointment. The failure. The woman they laughed at in restaurants. I walked toward the window and stared at the skyline. 5 years earlier, I had counted coins to buy groceries. Now I owned investments across multiple companies. I had properties, assets, savings, financial freedom. Everything I built had come from persistence, not luck, not family connections, not handouts. Persistence. The journey had been painful, but it had changed me. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Just 6 words. Please don't let us lose everything. I stared at the screen for a long time, because those words brought back another memory. A memory I had never forgotten. A rainy night, a small bedroom, tears running down my face, and my father saying, "Don't come back if things go wrong again." The memory felt as clear as if it happened yesterday. And for the first time since receiving my family's call, I felt anger. Real anger. Not because they needed help, because they expected it. As if the past should simply disappear. As if betrayal had an expiration date. But the next morning, I would discover something that changed everything. Something hidden. Something my family had never told me. Something connected to my late grandmother's estate. And once I learned the truth, the entire family dynamic would never be the same again. If you're enjoying the story, share it with someone who loves emotional revenge stories and family drama. The next chapter reveals a secret that changes everything. The next morning, I woke up planning to ignore my family for a few days. I needed space. I needed clarity. Most importantly, I needed to decide whether helping them was even the right thing to do. But before I could make that decision, someone unexpected called me. My grandmother's former attorney. The name immediately caught my attention. My grandmother, Margaret Bennett, had passed away 7 years earlier. She had been the only person in the family who truly believed in me. The only one who never compared me to Ethan. The only one who treated me like I mattered. I answered immediately. "Hello?" The elderly attorney sounded nervous. Miss Bennett, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you for a very long time. My stomach tightened. What is it? What he said next changed everything. Absolutely everything. 7 years earlier, shortly before her death, my grandmother had updated her will. According to the attorney, she intended to leave a significant portion of her estate to me. Not Ethan. Me. At first, I thought I misunderstood. My grandmother had loved both of us. Why would she leave me more? Then the attorney explained. My grandmother had noticed how differently I was treated. She saw the favoritism. She saw the comparisons. She saw the constant pressure placed on me. And because of that, she wanted to make sure I had opportunities no one could take away. When he told me the amount she had intended to leave me, I nearly stopped breathing. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to completely change someone's life, especially the version of me that had been struggling years ago. Then came the worst part. The money never reached me. Because someone had challenged the will. Someone had delayed proceedings. Someone had manipulated information during the estate process. And that someone was Ethan. I felt physically sick. The attorney continued explaining. At the time, the legal battle became complicated. Documents disappeared, deadlines passed, confusion spread throughout the process. Eventually, the estate was distributed differently. The matter seemed settled, until recently. A routine review uncovered irregularities, records that shouldn't have existed, signatures that raised questions, financial movements that suddenly looked suspicious. The attorney's office had reopened parts of the investigation, and what they were finding wasn't good. Not for Ethan. I sat in silence for several minutes after the call ended. My hands were shaking, not because of the money, because of what it represented. For years I believed my grandmother had left me very little. I accepted it. I moved on. Meanwhile, the person my family always praised may have quietly taken something meant for me. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed the inheritance. I didn't. I had built my own success. But because it proved something I had spent years trying not to believe. The favoritism wasn't just emotional. It had consequences. Real consequences. Life-changing consequences. That afternoon, I arranged a meeting with the attorney. I wanted facts, not assumptions, not emotions. Facts. For nearly 3 hours, we reviewed documents, old filings, financial records, correspondence, legal notes. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. There wasn't enough evidence yet to prove criminal wrongdoing, but there was enough to raise serious questions. Questions Ethan would eventually have to answer. Questions my parents probably knew nothing about. Or maybe they did. And that possibility bothered me even more. Because if they knew, then everything was worse than I imagined. As I left the attorney's office, my phone rang again. My mother. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Did you make a decision? Straight to business. No small talk. No concern. No questions about how I was doing. Just the money. I closed my eyes. For years I had wanted their attention. Now I finally had it. And it wasn't because they loved me. It was because they needed me. No, I replied. We really need help, Sophia. I almost laughed. The same family that once mocked me for being broke was now terrified of losing everything. The irony was impossible to ignore. Mom, I just found out something interesting today. Silence. What do you mean? Ask Ethan about Grandma's estate. The line went completely quiet. That silence told me more than words ever could. Then she spoke softly. What are you talking about? Ask him. And I hung up. That evening, Ethan called 6 times. I ignored every call. Then came text messages, one after another. At first they were polite, then defensive, then angry. The change happened quickly, almost as if he knew exactly what I had discovered. The final message simply said, "You don't understand the full story." I stared at the screen. Maybe I didn't. But I was starting to understand enough, and that was making people nervous. Very nervous. 3 days later, my parents demanded a family meeting. The same dining room, the same house, the same table where years earlier they had presented me with a list of expenses and treated me like a burden. Walking back into that room felt surreal. Everyone looked tense. Nobody smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the uncomfortable person at the table. They were. Ethan especially. He looked exhausted. His confidence continued disappearing. Eventually, my father spoke. "We need to resolve this." Resolve. Interesting choice of words. Not explain. Not apologize. Resolve. As if this was merely an inconvenience. The conversation started carefully, but within minutes it turned into an argument. Ethan denied wrongdoing. The attorney's findings were questioned. Excuses appeared. Explanations appeared. Half-truths appeared. Yet one thing never appeared: a real denial. And I noticed it immediately. Whenever specific questions arose, Ethan avoided them. Every time. That told me everything. Then something happened that nobody expected. My father finally lost his temper. Not at me. At Ethan. The room fell silent. For the first time in decades, the golden child was being challenged. My father demanded answers. Real answers. Questions Ethan couldn't avoid anymore. Questions that forced uncomfortable truths into the open. And as the truth emerged piece by piece, my mother began crying. Because she was realizing something devastating. The son she had protected for years may have been lying to all of us. For a very long time. The meeting ended without resolution. But one thing had changed. The illusion was broken. The perfect son image was cracking. And once cracks appear, they tend to spread. Fast. Very fast. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Peace. Because for the first time, people were seeing reality. The real reality. Not the version my family had spent years creating, but the truth. And the truth was only beginning to surface. Because within a week, investigators would uncover something hidden inside Ethan's business records. Something that would turn a financial disaster into a full-blown scandal. Something that would make headlines. Something that would force my family to face consequences they never imagined. And when that happened, they would come to me again, more desperate than ever. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe and share it with someone who loves powerful family betrayal stories. The next chapter is where everything starts exploding. 7 days after that family meeting, my phone exploded with notifications. At first, I thought it was a problem with one of my companies. Then I saw Ethan's name. Over and over. Messages, calls, emails, voicemails. Something had happened. Something big. I immediately turned on the news. And there it was. The headline that changed everything. A financial investigation into Ethan Bennett's company had become public. I sat frozen. The story wasn't just about debt anymore. Investigators had discovered major inconsistencies in company records. Missing funds, questionable transactions, unreported liabilities. Nothing had been proven criminal yet. But the allegations were serious enough to send clients running. Investors panicked. Contracts were canceled. Partners disappeared overnight. The business Ethan had spent years building was collapsing faster than anyone imagined, and this time, there was nowhere to hide. Within hours, my mother called. Then my father. Then relatives. Then cousins. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered I existed. It was amazing how quickly family could reappear when money became involved. I ignored most of the calls, but eventually, I answered one from my aunt. The same aunt who had laughed during the restaurant incident years earlier. Her voice sounded unusually sweet. "Sophia, sweetheart, how are you?" I almost smiled. The fake kindness was impossible to miss. "I'm fine." "That's wonderful." A pause followed. Then came the real reason for the call. "Your family is going through a difficult time." There it was. The setup, the guilt, the pressure, the expectation. I remained silent. Sophia, she continued, family should help family. I nearly laughed out loud. The irony was unbelievable. Where had that philosophy been when I was struggling? Where was family should help family when I couldn't afford rent? Where was it when I was being humiliated at every gathering? Where was it when I was treated like a disappointment? Apparently that rule only applied when the golden child needed saving. The following weekend, another family meeting was arranged. This time almost everyone attended. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't seen in years. The atmosphere felt more like a crisis meeting than a family gathering. Everyone looked worried. Everyone looked nervous. Everyone looked at me differently. For years, I had been invisible. Now I was suddenly the most important person in the room. Not because I had changed, because my bank account had. The realization was painful. As the meeting began, several relatives immediately started discussing solutions. Or more accurately, one solution: me. The conversation danced around it at first, then became increasingly direct. Eventually, my uncle cleared his throat. Sophia, you've done very well for yourself. I nodded. Another relative joined in. Everyone is proud of what you've accomplished. That was interesting. No one had mentioned being proud before. Not once. Then the real request arrived. We were hoping you could help Ethan. The room became silent. Every eye landed on me. Waiting. Watching. Expecting. The same people who once laughed at my failures now waited for my rescue. It felt surreal. I looked around the table slowly. Face after face. Memory after memory. Every insult. Every joke. Every humiliation. Every dismissal. Years of pain sat quietly in that room. Then I asked a simple question. How many of you helped me when I lost everything? Silence. Complete silence. Nobody answered. Because nobody could. The truth was obvious. None of them had. Not one. The room became uncomfortable. People shifted in their seats, avoided eye contact, looked down at the table. Anything except answering the question. Because the answer exposed everything. Before we continue, if you've ever seen people suddenly respect someone after they become successful, subscribe and stay with me because what happens next changes everything. Then my father finally spoke. His voice sounded older than I remembered. We made mistakes. The room froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Because those words had never been spoken before. Not once. Not ever. I stared at him, trying to determine whether he truly meant it, or whether desperation was speaking for him. We should have treated you differently. My mother started crying, again. But this time, something felt different. For the first time, she didn't seem upset about Ethan. She seemed upset about me, about what had happened, about years that couldn't be undone. The realization caught me off guard. Then something even more unexpected happened. My father stood up, slowly, carefully, and looked directly at me. I was wrong. 4 simple words. Yet somehow they felt heavier than anything else said that day. The man who spent years praising Ethan and criticizing me was admitting he had been wrong. The room remained silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Everyone understood how significant that moment was. For years I had imagined hearing those words. Now that they finally arrived, I wasn't sure how to feel. The meeting ended without a decision. I still hadn't agreed to help. I still hadn't promised anything. And honestly, I didn't know if I ever would. Because there was something nobody understood. This wasn't just about money. Money was easy. Trust was difficult. Trust was what had been destroyed. Trust was what remained broken. And trust couldn't be repaired with apologies alone. 3 days later, I received another call from the attorney handling my grandmother's estate. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something had happened. Good news. Big news. Very big news. "Miss Bennett," he said, "we found additional documentation." My heart immediately started racing. What kind of documentation? The answer stunned me. New records had been uncovered. Records directly connecting Ethan to decisions made during the estate process years earlier. Records no one believed still existed. Records powerful enough to completely change the legal situation. I sat down slowly. "What does that mean?" The attorney paused. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "It means your grandmother's estate may need to be reopened." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Because if that happened, everything would change. Money, assets, property, inheritance. The entire family history would be re-examined. And Ethan? Ethan could lose far more than his company. Far more. The truth was finally catching up to him, and it was moving much faster than anyone expected. But what none of us knew was that Ethan had one final secret. A secret hidden for years. A secret so shocking that when it finally came out, it would completely destroy the image my family had spent decades protecting. And when that secret reached the public, nothing would ever be the same again. If you're enjoying the story, share it with someone who loves emotional revenge and family betrayal stories. The next chapter reveals the secret that changes everything. 3 nights later, I received a call at 11:43 p.m. It was my cousin Ava. She sounded terrified, not worried, terrified. "Sophia, you need to see this." I sat upright immediately. "What happened?" There was silence on the other end. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "It's about Ethan." My first thought was that he'd been arrested. My second thought was that his company had finally collapsed completely. I was wrong on both counts. The truth was somehow worse. Much worse. Ava sent me a folder. Dozens of documents, emails, financial statements, private communications, records that had somehow found their way to investigators. As I began reading, my pulse started racing. By the 3rd document, I stopped breathing. By the 10th, I felt sick. By the 20th, I realized my entire family had been living a lie. For years, maybe decades. The successful businessman image Ethan built wasn't just exaggerated. Large parts of it were completely fabricated. Many of the achievements my family celebrated had never happened the way Ethan claimed. Some contracts had been inflated. Some accomplishments had been misleading. Several business successes weren't successes at all. He had simply manipulated appearances, the luxury lifestyle, the expensive vehicles, the endless celebrations. Most of it had been financed through borrowing and debt. Not profits, not success. Debt. Massive debt. The golden child wasn't actually winning. He was pretending to win. And everyone believed him. I spent the entire night reading. Every document revealed another layer, another deception, another hidden truth. The most painful part wasn't what Ethan had done. It was how easily everyone had believed him. Meanwhile, every achievement I earned had been questioned. Every success had been minimized. Every struggle had been mocked. The contrast hurt. Because for years, reality had been reversed. The responsible child was treated like a failure. The irresponsible child was treated like a genius. And now the truth was finally surfacing. The next morning, news outlets began publishing more information. The story spread quickly. Business publications picked it up. Financial commentators discussed it. Social media exploded. People who once praised Ethan suddenly disappeared. Investors vanished. Partners stopped answering calls. Former supporters became critics overnight. It was astonishing how quickly public admiration could turn into distance. The same people who once fought for Ethan's attention now wanted nothing to do with him. My parents were devastated, especially my mother. Years of belief were collapsing in front of her eyes. One afternoon, she came to visit me unexpectedly. The first thing I noticed was how exhausted she looked. The second thing I noticed was that she wasn't carrying requests. No paperwork, no proposals, no discussions about money. Just sadness. Real sadness. For a while, we simply sat together. Then she finally spoke. I failed you. The words caught me completely off guard. For years I had imagined conversations like this, but now that it was happening, I didn't know what to say. My mother looked down. Tears filled her eyes. We spent so much time protecting Ethan that we stopped seeing what we were doing to you. The room became quiet, very quiet, because deep down, both of us knew it was true. Not partially true, completely true. For nearly 2 hours, we talked. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. She admitted things I never expected her to admit. The favoritism, the comparisons, the unfair treatment, the excuses, everything. There were no defenses, no justifications, no attempts to rewrite history. Just honesty. Painful honesty. And strangely enough, that honesty mattered more than any amount of money ever could. Before we continue, if you've ever had someone finally admit they were wrong after years of denial, subscribe because the next chapter contains the biggest turning point of this entire story. A week later, the attorney handling my grandmother's estate called again. His tone sounded serious, extremely serious. "We need a meeting." My stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" "No." A pause followed. "Actually, it's very right." That answer confused me, until I arrived at his office. Then everything became clear. The investigation into my grandmother's estate had uncovered records nobody expected to find. Original instructions, private letters, financial notes, documents preserved in storage for years. And among those documents was something incredible. A handwritten letter from my grandmother, addressed to me, personally. The attorney carefully placed it on the table. I stared at it, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to process what I was seeing. 7 years after her death. My grandmother was about to speak to me one final time. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The letter was several pages long, every word written in her familiar handwriting. I immediately recognized it, and before I finished the first paragraph, tears filled my eyes. Because she knew everything. The favoritism, the comparisons, the loneliness, the pressure, the pain. She had seen it all, years before anyone else admitted it. And she wrote something I would never forget, something that stayed with me forever. She wrote, "The people who overlook you today may someday depend on the strength they never noticed." I read that sentence 3 times, then 4, then 5, because somehow it described my entire life. But the letter contained something else, something nobody expected, something directly connected to her estate. Instructions, specific instructions, instructions that had never been fully carried out. When the attorney explained the implications, I sat frozen, because the value involved wasn't small, not even close. The amount was life-changing, even for someone already successful. And legally, the money belonged to me, not Ethan, not my parents, me. The room felt suddenly smaller, because I knew what this meant. The truth wasn't just emerging anymore. The truth was winning. And soon the entire family would learn exactly how much had been hidden from them all these years. But before that could happen, Ethan made a decision, a desperate decision, a dangerous decision, one final attempt to save himself. And that decision would trigger the most dramatic confrontation our family had ever experienced, a confrontation that would determine the future of everything. 3 days after reading my grandmother's letter, Ethan showed up at my office, unannounced, uninvited, desperate. The receptionist called me first. "There's a man here asking for you." The moment she said his name, I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. For several seconds, I considered refusing. Then I changed my mind. It was time. Time for answers. Time for truth. Time for the conversation we should have had years ago. "Send him in." When Ethan entered my office, He looked nothing like the man who once mocked me. The expensive confidence was gone. The arrogant smile was gone. Even the way he walked had changed. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain, nervous, almost afraid. He sat across from me without speaking. The silence stretched. Finally, I broke it. "What do you want?" Ethan looked down. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he surprised me. "I'm sorry." The words landed heavily. Not because I believed them, because I never thought I'd hear them. Not from him. Not ever. For years, Ethan had always found a way to justify everything. Every insult, every joke, every cruel comment, every act of selfishness. There was always an excuse, always a reason, always someone else to blame. Now suddenly he was apologizing. I studied his face carefully, trying to understand whether this was guilt or desperation. Maybe both. "I'm serious," he continued. "I know I hurt you." I remained silent, because one apology couldn't erase years of damage, years of humiliation, years of being treated like I was less important, less capable, less valuable. One conversation couldn't fix that. Ethan seemed to understand, because he didn't argue. For once, he simply listened. Then he told me something I never expected. The truth about his life. The real truth. Not the version he showed everyone. Not the version my parents believed. The real version. And honestly, it shocked me. For years, Ethan had felt pressure to be perfect. Pressure to succeed. Pressure to justify the favoritism he received. Pressure to live up to expectations nobody could realistically maintain. At first, he succeeded. Then expectations grew. Then grew again. Then grew even more. Until eventually he became trapped inside the image everyone created. The golden child. The successful son. The future of the family. The winner. Once that image existed, he became terrified of losing it. Terrified of disappointing people. Terrified of failure. So when problems appeared, he hid them. Then hid bigger problems. Then bigger ones. Until eventually the lies became too large to control. I listened quietly. Not because it excused anything. It didn't. But because for the first time, Ethan sounded honest. Truly honest. No performance. No arrogance. No manipulation. Just honesty. And honestly, that version of him seemed exhausted, like someone carrying a weight for years. Then the conversation shifted, and everything changed. Because Ethan finally admitted something nobody expected. Something connected to my grandmother's estate. Something that had haunted our family for years. His voice shook. I knew about the changes in Grandma's will. The room became silent. Very silent. I felt my heartbeat quicken. "What do you mean?" Ethan closed his eyes. Then came the truth. Years ago, when he learned my grandmother intended to leave me a significant portion of her estate, he panicked. Not because he needed the money, because he felt threatened by what it represented. For the first time in our lives, I was being chosen over him, and he couldn't handle it. So he interfered. Not directly enough to create obvious evidence, but enough to create confusion. Enough to delay processes, enough to influence outcomes, enough to change what happened. The confession hit like a truck. Because deep down, I already suspected it. Now I was hearing it from him directly. Before we continue, if you've ever seen the truth come out after years of lies, subscribe and stay with me, because the final chapter brings everything together in a way nobody expected. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The office felt strangely quiet, almost peaceful, which was surprising considering what had just happened. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ethan laughed bitterly. Not because anything was funny, because he finally understood. The truth comes out eventually. I couldn't argue with that, because he was right. The truth always waits, patiently, silently. Then eventually it arrives. As Ethan stood to leave, he paused at the door. Then he turned back toward me. I don't expect forgiveness. For the first time that day, I nodded. Because forgiveness and accountability aren't the same thing. Never have been. Never will be. Then he left. And I honestly didn't know if I'd ever see him again. 2 weeks later, the legal proceedings surrounding my grandmother's estate reached a conclusion. The evidence had become overwhelming. The documents were clear. The instructions were clear. The intentions were clear. The estate would be corrected. The assets that should have been transferred years earlier would finally be transferred properly. When the attorney delivered the final numbers, I sat speechless. Even after everything I had already built, the inheritance significantly increased my wealth. But strangely enough, the money wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was validation, proof. Proof that my grandmother believed in me. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that someone saw my value long before the rest of the family did. Meanwhile, Ethan's situation continued worsening. His business officially collapsed. Properties were sold. Assets disappeared. The empire everyone admired no longer existed. The golden child image was gone forever. And for the first time in decades, our family was forced to see reality. Not the version they preferred. The truth. The actual truth. And as painful as that truth was, it finally gave everyone a chance to heal. Or at least begin trying. A month later, my father called. His voice sounded different. Not proud, not demanding, not authoritative, humble. And what he asked surprised me. Sophia, would you come to dinner? Not because they needed money. Not because they needed help. Just dinner. For the first time in years. A real family dinner. And what happened at that table would become the final chapter of a story none of us would ever forget. The invitation to dinner sat in my mind for days. Part of me wanted to decline. Part of me wanted to move forward and never look back. After everything that had happened, nobody could have blamed me. Not after the years of favoritism, not after the humiliation, not after the betrayal, not after the inheritance, not after everything. Yet something kept pulling me back. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure, maybe a chance to finally put the past where it belonged, in the past. So eventually, I agreed. The following Sunday evening, I drove to my parents' house. The same house where I once cried myself to sleep. The same house where I was treated like a burden. The same house where I felt invisible. As I pulled into the driveway, memories flooded back. Painful memories, embarrassing memories, lonely memories. But this time felt different, because I wasn't arriving as the woman they pitied. I wasn't arriving as the struggling daughter. I wasn't arriving as the family failure. I was arriving as myself, confident, independent, successful. Not because someone gave me an opportunity, because I built one. When I walked through the front door, nobody was waiting with criticism. Nobody was waiting with jokes. Nobody was waiting with comparisons. Instead, there were nervous smiles, awkward greetings, uncertain conversations. For the first time in years, everyone seemed unsure of themselves. It was strange. The family that once judged me so confidently now seemed afraid of saying the wrong thing. Dinner started quietly, very quietly. Everyone seemed careful, almost too careful. The usual family dynamics had disappeared. The old hierarchy was gone. The golden child image was gone. The family scapegoat role was gone. Reality had replaced both, and reality was much more honest. Halfway through dinner, my father stood up. The room immediately became silent. I looked at him. My mother looked at him. Everyone looked at him. He took a deep breath. Then he spoke. Sophia, there are things I should have said years ago. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. We were wrong. His voice cracked. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw tears in my father's eyes. Real tears. Not sadness. Regret. Deep regret. I spent years believing I was helping this family by protecting Ethan. He paused. I thought I was supporting him. Another pause. But all I really did was hurt you. The room remained silent. Every word felt heavy. Years of denial were finally disappearing. Years of excuses were finally ending. Years of pain were finally being acknowledged. Then my mother began crying. Not softly, not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from carrying guilt for too long. She looked directly at me. We failed you. 3 words. Simple, honest, painful. And somehow those words meant more than all the money in the world. Because for years I questioned myself. Wondered if I was imagining things. Wondered if I was being too sensitive. Wondered if I was the problem. Now I finally had my answer. I wasn't. Then something happened that surprised everyone, including me. I stood up. Not to attack them. Not to humiliate them. Not to seek revenge. I stood up because I finally understood something. The revenge had already happened. Not through punishment. Not through humiliation. Not through destruction. Through success. The greatest revenge wasn't watching them fail. The greatest revenge was refusing to fail myself. While they were laughing at me, I kept working. While they doubted me, I kept believing. While they underestimated me, I kept growing. That was the revenge. And it was already complete. I looked around the room, at my parents, at my relatives, at the family that once thought I would never amount to anything. Then I smiled, and I told them the truth. I forgive you. Several people immediately started crying, including Ethan. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't erase consequences. It simply meant I was no longer willing to carry the anger. Because carrying anger only gives the past power, and I was done giving the past power. Months passed. Slowly, relationships improved. Not perfectly, not instantly. Trust takes time. Real trust always does. But things began changing. Conversations became honest. Comparisons stopped. Respect appeared where judgment once existed. For the first time in decades, our family started functioning like a family. A real family. Not a competition. Not a hierarchy. A family. As for Ethan, his life became much simpler. The expensive image disappeared. The need to impress everyone disappeared. The pressure disappeared. Ironically, losing everything forced him to become more honest than he had ever been. And strangely enough, that honesty helped him rebuild. Not his old empire. Something better. His character. 2 years later, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in my office. The city stretched endlessly below. The companies I owned continued growing. The investments continued growing. The properties continued growing. Financially, I had achieved everything I once thought was impossible. But the money wasn't what made me proud. What made me proud was remembering the woman who counted coins at a grocery store. The woman everyone mocked. The woman everyone underestimated. The woman nobody believed in. Because she never quit. My phone buzzed. A family group message. A photo from a Sunday dinner. Everyone smiling. Everyone together. Everyone older. Everyone wiser. I stared at the image for a long moment. Then I smiled. Because life had taught me something important. People can take your money. People can take your opportunities. People can take your confidence. People can even take years from your life. But they can never stop you from becoming the person you're meant to be. Unless you let them. And I never did. Today, when people hear my story, they usually focus on the ending. The wealth, the success, the inheritance, the comeback. But that's not the real lesson. The real lesson is this. Never let someone else's opinion become your identity. Because the people laughing at you today may be judging a chapter, while you're still writing the entire book. And sometimes the person everyone thinks has lost becomes the one who wins the most. If this story touched you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and remember, your current situation is not your final destination.